Hello, everyone, and welcome now on these very short transitions. I'm very pleased to welcome now Henning Voppel, the director of the Hamburg Institute for International Economics, who is going to introduce our keynote speaker today. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, the director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University. Jeffrey, thanks so much for joining us. You might remember that you attended our first conference in New York more than 25 years ago. And at that time, it was about, should we be thinking about international bankruptcy court for sovereign debt countries? And this is, again, unfortunately, a topic that the G20 is grasping.
That one never goes away.
Yeah. This is not the topic of the day, but thank you for joining. It's a great pleasure, and I hope that we will see each other face to face. Henning, over to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and guests, my name is Henning Voppel. I'm director of the Hamburg Institute of International Economics, and I'd like to welcome all of you to the closing panel of this conference on the post-COVID era, redefining and redesigning the global economy. And I think this panel is on pathways to a low-carbon and sustainable global economy. And I think we all agree that this topic will be of great importance, even and especially after the COVID-19 crisis. And climate change is probably the biggest global challenge in the history of mankind. We need to respect the planetary limits of growth and to be reconciled with the way we live and the way we organize our economy and utilizing scarce resources. Of course, we cannot simply switch from a fossil state of the economy to a non-fossil, decarbonized state of the economy. So we have to talk about transition and transformation and how to create change. So on pathways to a new economy, and I think infrastructure is important, institutions and innovation are the key factors to this regard. And Mariana Mazzucato has emphasized the importance of public sector missions, or what she called missions. But changing incentives and accountabilities are also important in order to align the private sector, so consumers and firms, to this pathway. So we have some fundamental changes ahead of us, and also the question whether or not capitalism and globalization can contribute or is probably part of the problem is very important to this regard. So we will first have a keynote, and I would like to welcome and introduce Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He is director of the Earth Institute and, well, one of the most renowned economists in the world. And Jeffrey, we met in 2017. You were attending in Hamburg at the G20, and from then on, we were trying to get you on board for a conference, and today it's going to happen. So we are very grateful for your time. We appreciate your time. And Jeffrey, the floor is yours.
Henning, thank you very, very much. That was a wonderful G20, by the way, in Hamburg. What a joy to hear Ode to Joy of Beethoven played to the world leaders that evening at the concert hall, and to see even Donald Trump smiling to the music. So that was an extraordinary memory for me. Thank you, everybody. And Mark, thank you so much for your leadership and organization of this great effort. What do we mean by a sustainable future? I think we should define our terms quickly and then ask how they can be achieved. To my mind, sustainable development means both social justice and environmental sustainability. So it is the idea of combining economic development with social justice and with a safe environment. We have not accomplished that goal during the 30 plus years since sustainable development has been our supposed organizing principle. The world economy, even before COVID-19, was less and less fair, and the environment more and more degraded with the profound threats, not only from human-induced climate change, but the collapse of biodiversity, mega pollution. Reading a study just a couple of days ago pointing out that air pollution accounts for perhaps 1 in 5 premature deaths in the planet, and these zoonotic events with ever greater frequency, not only SARS-CoV-2, but SARS, H1N1, Nipah, MERS, and other emerging diseases. We have an environmental catastrophe underway. We have a social crisis that is very, very deep. And we have a commitment to a comprehensive approach to solving the challenges of not only economics, but society and environment. Well, we're not doing so, partly because the economic models within our individual countries are deficient. The United States is a vivid example of a country that is extremely rich, but extremely unfair, profoundly racist, high inequality, great injustice, and the oligarchs of the United States never caring about the environment until very, very recently. So the US is an example of a country that can become very rich but fail utterly in sustainable development. The other reason we fail in sustainable development, of course, is the lack of global cooperation, because all sustainable development objectives, both social and environmental, require a high degree of global cooperation. But we are not in a cooperative world environment. We are in a competitive to hostile world environment. Again, I put a lot of the blame on the United States as the world's most powerful country militarily. It has done a great deal of damage to international cooperation over the past 30 years, not being part of UN processes, going to war unilaterally on multiple occasions, imposing unilateral sanctions, politicizing the dollar, even though that's the US, the international key currency, and now trying to instigate a Cold War with China, at least during the Trump years. So if we don't solve our domestic problems of oligarchic economic structures, and if we don't solve our international problems of lack of cooperation, we don't achieve sustainable development, because market forces by themselves can produce wealth, but they do not produce social justice and they do not produce environmental sustainability. So how do we get to where we want to go? I think the starting point is clarity of our objectives. And here the world is better at stating objectives than it is at achieving them. But I think it's notable that the world has stated several absolutely valid objectives. The Sustainable Development Goals is an impressive set of short-term objectives to the year 2030. The Paris Climate Agreement is a valid and very important statement of objectives about the world to 2050. The UN Convention on Biological Diversity is a very important statement of global goals regarding biodiversity. It's a shame the United States hasn't even signed, or I should clarify, the United States signed but never ratified the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is amazing, by the way, how irresponsible of my country. So we have a number of important global goals. I would say they are capped off by our human rights goals. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a set of goals about human dignity and economic justice, the right for every human being to have access to healthcare, education, and social protection. The international covenants of not only civil and political rights, but of economic, social, and cultural rights from the 1960s are, again, very important global goals, but we do not get organized to achieve them because there is far too much internal corruption in the American system, for example, and far too much international hostility and lack of effective multilateralism. Okay, these are trite points, but I think that they're important to say. In my opinion, the most important thing we can do is achieve what we have agreed to do, to take seriously the goals that we have stated and then ask in a practical and rational way, how can they be achieved? Let me take as a case the Paris Climate Agreement. It says that we should aim to limit human-induced global warming to below 1.5 degrees C compared with the pre-industrial level. This year, we are at about 1.25 degrees C. 2020 was the warmest year on record, tied with 2016. Despite it being a La Nina year, which normally would cool the planet, we're in a dramatic state, very close to the limit that we have agreed. What needs to be done? All of the science is consistent that we need to end anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 at the latest. And even doing that gives us no more than a 2/3 chance of success in keeping to below 1.5 degrees C by end of century. So this is our basic objective. We have a international process, the UN Framework Convention. We are having COP26 in Glasgow in November. It seems to me the most basic logic of our situation that every government should come to Glasgow on November 1 with a plan to reach net zero emissions by 2050. This is the basis. The European Union has adopted that by law in the European Green Deal. Japan and Korea have announced these goals. President Biden will adopt this goal. The United Kingdom has adopted this goal. Canada has adopted this goal. China has committed to decarbonize by 2060, which is a big breakthrough, and I expect that China can accelerate that to 2050 because it masters all of the critical technologies. And so this is an example of how we could move from an objective, which has a limit on warming, to a science-based target, decarbonized by 2050, to a set of national plans under a multilateral framework that needs to be coupled with multilateral financing. Because even though the United States pledged in 2009 that developing countries would receive $100 billion or more of official financing for the climate goals by 2020, we are now in 2021, and 12 years after the promise was made, there still is no specific plan for that. That's a shame that the richest countries in the world cannot follow through on basic, explicit commitments, because $100 billion in this world is just not a lot of money for financing. The most recent emergency appropriation for the US budget is $1.9 trillion, just to keep it in perspective. So we need the goals, the multilateral process, the specific plans of action, and the financing mechanisms around this. I won't belabor this in all of the other areas, except to say that structurally, the challenges are similar in the Convention on Biological Diversity, because there are specific actions on land use and protected land areas that would protect species on land, and there are specific ways to protect the ocean fisheries that could implement the objectives of the Convention on Biological Diversity. But our governments have not taken them seriously, starting first with my own, the United States, which hasn't even ratified the convention. We have several other related goals. Universal access to digital technologies is a similar part of sustainable development now. Funding for all children in poor countries to be in school, which is part of Sustainable Development Goal 4, for example, is a modest outlay requiring about $50 billion a year, but unachieved. So, Henning, my basic argument is we need to get organized. This is a rational planning process. It requires multilateral institutions. It requires a financing model in a world economy of well over $100 trillion a year. Meeting sustainable development is a very low cost. But in a world of selfishness, greed, and short-sighted politicians, it has been beyond imagining up until now. We reached the point of disaster. COVID-19 is not only an accident, it was an accident waiting to happen. It was an accident that was predicted. Climate change, biodiversity collapse, increasing inequality in our societies, lack of taxation of big tech, lack of regulation, lack of access to digital services. All of these are known ills that run counter to commitments that we've made. And we need to roll up our sleeves to have national, regional, and global plans of action seriously undertaken. It's not normal politics. We don't need normal politics right now. We need rational, far-sighted thinking and design. It's not impossible. Human beings know how to do that. Multilateral systems can work, but it's a huge challenge. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey, for your inspiring talk. And if there's some time left for another question, I would like to ask you, or to put it this way, I mean, in history, technology development and innovation was not directed to a clear target or objective. This time it's different. I mean, we have a clear objective. That's clear. I mean, by 2050 or even earlier, we have to be fully decarbonized on a global level. How optimistic are you in terms of technology and innovation? I mean, or to what extent? I mean, you said coordination is required on a global level. To what extent cooperation is needed, and also redistribution? I mean, by 2050, we will have 3 billion more people, and these people will be born into developing rather than developed economies. So how can we do that? How optimistic you are? What combination of different policies do we need?
I think the technological barriers are the least of our problems, actually. Even the development of vaccines within 1 year, which is unprecedented for vaccine development, shows us that we are in an accelerated technology mode. The digital revolution and all that that means for biotechnical, for material science, for renewable energy and so forth, is operating at a remarkable pace of progress right now. Even on existing technologies, decarbonizing the global energy system is within reach at less than 1% per annum of world output, probably well below 1% incremental cost of doing so. The reason is that photovoltaics, wind turbines, smart grid, electric vehicles, battery storage have all come down in cost decisively just within the last 10 years. So we're not even beyond technological means with the current technologies, but the acceleration of improvement is dramatic. We've actually very often organized mission-driven technologies. I happen to be doing a lot of reading these days about the original Manhattan Project to develop the atomic bomb in World War II. It's an example, first of all, of accelerated, directed technological development, but it's also a reminder that it often comes in the context of war and comes in the context of national interests rather than global interests. The moonshot of the 1960s was an extraordinarily intensive and successful technological effort, because when President Kennedy committed the United States to a one-decade moonshot effort, NASA had no sure plan of how this could possibly be accomplished. And the United States had put one person in suborbital flight for 15 minutes by the time that Kennedy made his speech. So this was a directed technological challenge. The United States invented, with government leadership, the internet, mainly to protect computer communications during nuclear war. Who knew what this was really about to spawn? But that's what DARPA did in creating the internet. The Human Genome Sequencing Project was a directed technological effort with a clear human, peaceful purpose of health. And that result, of course, is a vivid reason why we're able to get a vaccine within 1 year, because of all the science that has attended to genomics during this period. The SARS-CoV-2 genome was posted within 2 weeks of its identification. And then it was posted on January 11th, 2020. Within a few weeks, there were already vaccine candidates established on the mRNA models. So this is the scientific world that we're in right now. If we stop mobilizing it to steal people's identities, to put fake data, to commit cyber warfare and hacking, or to make money on advertising, and actually direct it to the things that are important for us, technology will not be our limit. Our limits are organizational and power relations. The fact that what is good for humanity is sometimes not seen to be so good for the plutocracy or for a particular individual country.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. That's an important point, I think, because at least to my assessment, we can observe currently a lack of organizational intelligence and implementation. So I think that's a very important point. Jeffrey, we do know that you have to leave. So we are very thankful for your time. We appreciate your time. It was wonderful to have you with us. And hopefully we can welcome you on another occasion in the future. So,
and maybe we'll all see each other face to face sometime soon, which would be very nice.
Hopefully. It was a pleasure.
Very good. Thanks to everybody. Great to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So that was a wonderful introduction, I think. And this keynote is now followed by our panel discussion. And first of all, I would like to introduce our distinguished experts and panelists. Let me start by Ding-Yi Fan. He's Associate Dean of the Hainan Green Finance Research Institute. So welcome and thank you for your participation. And it's also a pleasure to welcome Rei-Kwon Chung. He's Nobel Peace Prize laureate and Professor Emeritus of the Incheon National University. It's also a great pleasure to have you with us. And third, it's Zheng Lin, Deputy Director of the Research Center of Green Finance Development at the PBC School of Finance, Tsinghua University. Welcome, and thanks for your time and attendance. And moreover, we are delighted to have Andy Kalitz from the Future Energy and Secretary General-elect of the International Gas Union. Welcome, great to have you. And last but not least, Boris Porfiriev, Scientific Director of the Institute of Economic Forecasting at the Russian Academy of Sciences. For this closing panel on, I think, one of the most pressing and urgent topics we will face after or in the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis. So the panel is organized as follows. We will start with a 6 minutes presentation or introductory comments by you, and afterwards we can focus on some specific topics, for example, on finance or on infrastructure or innovation. So, but first of all, I would like to start with your introductory comments and remarks, and maybe you can also comment on Jeffrey Sachs, of course, as you like. So I would like to start with Ding Yifan. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting discussion about low carbon economy. So I prepared a PPT. I don't know whether I can put it into these. Yes. I think this, you can see the picture. So I came from the Hainan Green Finance Institute, which is a newly created institution of financial green economy research and development. It has been created in 2018, so just 2 years ago, to accompany the development of Highland. Because Hainan is one of the biggest islands in China, and the Chinese government just decided to develop Hainan Island into a free port zone. So we should accompany the development of Hainan Island with a lot of positive political measures to make it work, to make this free port work. So we have created these new research institutions. These institutions has been focused mainly on 4 aspects of development: financial studies, green economy development, and bond market development, because we wanted to develop Hainan Island into a free port, and so somehow liberalize the financial market and low carbon economy. So these 4 panels constitute the main, and then the last but not the least is regional economy development. Regional, I mean not only regional in China, but regional in all these Southeast Asia, East Asia, and more recently RCEP. So the regional comprehensive economy partnership that China concluded with ASEAN countries, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. So China is focusing its economic development on building the biggest free trade zone in the world. So that's how the Hainan Green Finance Institute is conceived. So let's have a talk about low carbon economy. China's government made a firm commitment to reach the CO2 emission peak in 2030, so in a decade, and then to get to carbon neutrality in 2060. I heard that Jeffrey Sachs just proposed Chinese government to move forward and to reach this target in 2050. But we can see, because looking back to China's progress in recent years, we are fully confident that China could make a lot of progress in the future. For example, being currently the biggest producer of CO2 emission, China's decision might have tremendous impact on global climate evolution, not only in this. So I will just outline 3 points: success in China's low carbon development, future of low carbon development, and measures to ensure sustainable development of a low carbon economy. So in 2019, compared to 2005, China's energy intensity lowered by 48.1%, reached the target of lowering 40 to 45% intensity in 2020. So we have moved 1 year early than the plan, than the target fixed in the plan. Also in 2019, China's non-fossil fuel energy in its total energy consumption reached 15.3%, 6.6% higher than in 2012. While in the plan, we should reach 15 of non-fossil fuel energy in 2020. So also we moved 1 year ahead of our plan. So currently, China has developed this new renewable energy. China has 30% of the world installed capacity of renewable energy. Currently, China is the biggest producer of renewable energy. The stock of new energy vehicle in China is more than half of the world global production. So that's how China moved forward for these. How China could ensure its development. China will continue this development trend of renewable energy because we think that renewable energy development will be the key point of China's of the realization of China's low carbon economy development. And then China will convert all these production instruments into electrification. So the use of electricity in all industries will be the target of the production. And then we have to develop the Internet of Things that could spare us a lot of emissions in the process of production, in the process of transport, so on and so forth. And then digitalization of economy, especially of manufacturing, industrial production, that could also spare a lot of energy consumption in these sectors. And last but not the least, China has planned of development of hydrogen use. We will use extensively hydrogen in China's energy consumption percentage. And then not only we have to find a way to produce more and more hydrogen, I think properly, but also we have decided to transform some fossil fuels into hydrogen. I know that some part in Europe, they call it maybe a dirty hydrogen, but we in China, we plan to develop some sequestration technology of the CO2 while producing hydrogen out of these fossil fuels. Datong, for example, Datong is traditionally China's capital of coal production. While in the next 5-year plan, Datong is committed to transforming itself into the capital of hydrogen. He will produce a lot of hydrogen from natural gas, because Datong has also a lot of natural gas. But the target, the future target, is to push forward the research on transforming coal into hydrogen, where we have to work out a lot of plans, a lot of technology to transform traditional fossil fuels into hydrogen. That's how China is planning to develop its sustainable and low carbon economy. So to reach this target, to reach the peak of China's CO2 peak in 2030, and then to reach the carbon neutrality in 2060, we may move it ahead and we may reach earlier than the target, than the plan. That's, I have to explain how China plans to realize its targets. Mainly in China, the governments have to distribute its CO2 emission caps to every industries. So every industrial enterprises will be attributed a cap of the emission. And then if they can not reach the cap, or if they made a lot of technology progress in terms of carbon emission, they can sell their quotas on the market. So we have built a market for CO2 emission quota exchange. So some firms could sell their extra quotas on the market, and other firms that cannot reach the cap of CO2 emission have to buy those quotas. So we have to build this kind of market. And last but not the least, what is most important in China is its system of meritocracy. Because Chinese, bureaucratic promotion system is called meritocracy system. And then we know that every mayors, for example, in China, mayors are competing for their governance performance. If they behave good in their governance, in a public governance, they might be promoted to a higher rank, to be a governor of a province, for example, and to the leader, national leader. So they have to show in their governance performance the criteria about low carbon economy, because currently low carbon economy has been considered as one of the criteria to measure those governing performance. So that's something very, very simple, but something very, very effective, because every official at a lower stage wanted to be promoted at the higher stage. So they have to show their ability to manage the low carbon economy. So that's something very, very effective in Chinese history and in China's recent development. So with these three instruments, we think that we could manage Chinese low carbon economy. We could reach our target in 2030 and before 2060. That's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting, and without any doubt, China is a crucial player to this regard. And it's interesting that we probably have the possibility that China will once a time join Europe and the US for a common market for CO2 emissions. We will see. Now I would like to ask Regwan Chung to give a short presentation. We are very interested in your point of view. The floor is yours. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. First of all, good evening from Seoul, Korea, and it's my pleasure joining the panel. And first of all, because I'd like to stick to 6-minute time allotted to me, so I will go very quickly. First of all, my number one point, we have to shift from extreme short-termism for short-term profit to long-term investment. Climate change and the pandemic, COVID-19, social infrastructure, these are all long-term goals. But world economy, especially American model, American dream, which means fast bucks, overnight millionaire, this kind of urge to be rich overnight has made all the people and the economic policy making focusing on short-term profit, maximizing short-term production. This is the paradigm which we were stuck in, and if we move away from it, resolving the climate crisis issue, pandemic issue, then we have to shift towards a long-term investment paradigm for long-term goals. But that cannot happen unless we have a very strong political commitment on it. And a very interesting example happening in Korea, China, and Japan, because of the American new President Biden's commitment for carbon neutrality, then China moved, Japan moved to accept the carbon neutrality. Then Korea moved as well to accept the carbon neutrality. And because of this kind of statement, the Korean steel maker, the Pohang Steel, POSCO, Pohang Steel is emitting almost 7 or 8% of Korea's emission coming from one company. And even this company, before that commitment, were very reluctant to accept carbon neutrality. But once the president announced it, then they gave up to resisting it, and they changed their position. They say that, okay, we will try to accelerate the innovation for hydrogen steel making. So this is a very dramatic change of the attitude from the private sector. It happened only because of they realized that the political commitment is no longer a joke. It is a real serious business because it's not only Korea, but Japan, China, and the United States and Europe. Now the Korean business understand that it is it's joke, laughing joke. So then they are getting serious, just like the case of vaccine for COVID-19. So technology, money is not the issue. We have too much money in Wall Street. We have a technical capacity. It is a very puzzling dilemma. On the one hand, we have too much money in Wall Street, and we have too little money for COVID-19 and the climate crisis. If we don't survive this pandemic and climate crisis, then somebody from outside will smile at us, or these guys died because of their own ignorance and stupidity. They have too much money for stock and speculation, but they don't have little money for their own survival. This is a kind of a very interesting dilemma. So we have to reform our financial system, but it's very difficult because the financing by nature focusing on short-term profit. So how can we internalize a long-term goal into financial scheme? It depends on government policy making. So the policy is more important. In other words, political commitment is more important than money and technology. Money and technology are all available. I have been saying that it's not an issue. The issue is political commitment and the policy environment, like a carbon tax and cap on the carbon budget, this kind of, but it is very important, not just a lip service of carbon neutrality or carbon capping, but they have to make the people and the private sector to believe that the announcement of carbon neutrality is not just a joke. They mean real business. So that the politicians has to prove that they will legalize their carbon target as a real legally binding target. It's not just a wish list. They have to show it to the private sector. But in order to do that, we need a very important point. The politicians will never do it unless they are convinced that committing to a carbon neutrality and the committing to a carbon budget, net zero by 2050, will make their economy more vibrant and create more jobs and the economic growth more stimulated. So we have to turn our perception that carbon neutrality and the net zero is bad for our economy, damaging on our economy. We have to turn it around that it is an actual opportunity for our new economic growth and new job creation. So we have to have a new conviction that it is no longer just a damage, but it's an opportunity for economic growth and job creation. Then the politicians will be willing to commit on their commitment for carbon neutrality. Already 6 minutes, but if I add just one more point, one issue nobody talks about is surprising. Even United States, European Union, nobody talks about how can we decarbonize carbon-intensive industry such as steel making, shipbuilding, car making, petrochemical industry. How are we going to decarbonize energy-intensive industry? Nobody talks about it. They're afraid of talking about it. Unless they really, to prove that they are serious, then they have to talk about how to decarbonize steel making, all these energy-intensive industry. So I propose that globally, all this sectoral industry has to sit down together to come up with a roadmap for net zero by 2050 by industry, because it doesn't matter if Korea producing hydrogen steel making, it doesn't mean anything. If China continue to fossil fuel steel making, it just doesn't mean anything. So we have to have a global roadmap to have agreed on it. Otherwise, nobody will believe that our political announcement for carbon neutrality or net zero will mean real business. Okay, I will start here. Thank you. For 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. And I think you correctly emphasized the importance of green finance and long-term investment. I think that's crucial. Thanks a lot. And next is Cheng Li. Thanks again for joining. Please.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Great. So let me share my screen. I also prepared a few slides. Can you see this? Great. So thank you very much for invitation. And I'm Cheng Li from Tsinghua University. And I'm very happy to share with you how China actually in the past few years was trying to realize a low carbon pathway for its economy and development through a market-based solution, green finance. And I heard also a lot of experts already mentioned green finance, including previous session, which I enjoyed a lot. So I have 6 minutes. Let me just be quick. I'll be focusing on first two topics, and then leave the third topic for the second round. So first two topics include overview of China's green financial market since early 2015 and 2016. And then second part will be focusing on net zero target, how green investment opportunities will be coming out, and the transition risks that financial institutions and investors need to pay attention to. First part is on the green financial products market. By now, we have already got a very, I think, deep green financial market in China, and which is already one of the largest in the world, including at least 4 parts. The first part is on green credits or green loans. Second thing is green bonds. Third part is on green insurance, and number 4 is green funds. And the largest one coming from green credits and green bonds. So here is a chart and a pie. On the left hand is the number of outstanding green loans in China, 21 largest commercial banks, which are nationally operating. And of course, there are also hundreds of smaller banks, but they are also operating in regional level, and the numbers are much smaller. So by end of 2020, the total outstanding green loans in China, 21 largest commercial banks, were reaching around like 12 trillion RMB, which was around $1.8 trillion US. I think it's one of the largest, probably the largest in the world, as only China has the taxonomy for green loans. On the right is the spreadsheet of where these loans are coming from. The largest issuer is Green China Development Bank. And the second one is Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. The next slide, I'll show you how the green bonds market performed in the past 4 years. So you will see in the very beginning, the green bond market was standing at somewhere like 300 billion RMB. It was coming out of almost nothing. So a lot of colleagues saying China's green bond market was growing from almost zero to hero overnight. And by end of 2020, the total green bonds issued by China financial institutions and the companies in the world, including those based in mainland China and also overseas, especially Europe, was more than 1.4 trillion RMB. And then the second part is on how many international initiatives and collaborations China has participated since 2016, including the G20 Green and Sustainable Finance Study Group, and also participating in the central banks and regulators network for greening the financial system as a founding member. And then how China is paying special attention to greening investments in the Belt and Road. So I'll go through this very quickly. in G20, the Green and Sustainable Finance Study Group was co-chaired by China and the UK, two central banks. Since 2016 and 18, for 3 consecutive years, the green and the sustainable finance has been focused on quite a huge range of topics, which probably I will discuss later. And then on the NGFS was very recently established in December 2017, and 8 central banks regulators coming from China, France, the UK, Germany, Singapore, Mexico, and Norway. So these central banks and this network has grown to more than 135, and most recently, I think Fed also joined the NGFS as the most recent member. And the last thing, as I mentioned, is the Green Investment Principles for the Belt and Road, as a very important initiative to green not only investments within China, but also investments overseas, especially by investors based in China, and also the financial institutions who are supporting and sponsoring those projects to make sure green investments and also carbon neutrality or low carbon development is not only realized in China, but also the potential for Belt and Road countries are also involved in the whole process. My second part of the slides will be focusing on the green investment opportunities and the transition risks that investors and financial institutions need to pay attention in the coming decades, as China announced the carbon neutrality by 2060. And Jeffrey also mentioned that China has the potential to escalate that to earlier dates. And I strongly believe with him. And there are many local governments and sectors that has the potential to achieve maybe earlier. I will just share maybe with you a few points where we think the green finance can be more improved to meet such a target on green on carbon neutrality. As many studies have already estimated that realizing carbon neutrality in China will entail hundreds of trillions of yuan in green investment in the coming decades. And in Tsinghua University, the study shows that in energy sector alone, the investment needs for green investments will be around more than 135 trillion RMB. That's a lot of investments. So just a perspective of how much the money is. By 2020, the overall GDP of China was only slightly above 100 trillion RMB. So the investments for green in energy sector will be somewhere more, maybe 1.4 times of this GDP in 1 year. In order to mobilize those investments, of course, most of them will have to come from the private sector, and also consumers would have to contribute as well. Local authorities and financial regulators must be prepared and take the lead in formulating roadmaps for green finance development. First, we think green finance standards should be revised with carbon neutrality as its goal in the center. We already have the green finance standards, but now it's outdated and also needs to be improved, at least to be aligned with the carbon neutrality goal. Second thing is the financial institutions should disclose environmental information, including their green and high carbon assets and their carbon footprints. A lot of information disclosure is already in place in not only the central government, but also in local governments, but it's not aligned, and we are encouraging them to be disclosing as maybe in alignment with internationally recognized standards like TCFD. Thirdly, major financial institutions shall conduct environmental and climate risk analysis to better understand the credit, market, and reputation risk involved in climate change. This is very crucial to make sure financial institutions and investors understand that this environmental and climate risks are bringing material risks to their investments. Otherwise, they will be turning into stranded assets. And so that they will understand that they probably will turn and divest from high carbon and make more investments in green. The fourth thing is a more effective incentive mechanism for green finance shall be established. In different local governments, incentive mechanisms were already established. But in China, we are discussing maybe 2 major incentives. One thing is to establish a green re-lending facility by the central bank. I think it will be at least more than 100 billion RMB. And the second thing is consideration of adjusting the risk weights of green and high carbon assets by the banking system. Number 4 point would be the foreign exchange, and sovereign wealth fund managers should actively carry out a sustainable investment to guide private sector and the social capital to participate in green finance. So currently the investors and participants to the green financial market are coming from banks and private sectors. But actually, foreign exchange and also the sovereign wealth fund managers are not 100% aligned with this trend. So they need to be involved as well, because China, as everybody knows, has the largest foreign exchange reserve in the world. And the sovereign wealth funds actually are also playing a very important role in China's market. Number 6 is the financial regulators should mandate environmental impact assessments of overseas investments. So not only in China, but also along the Belt and Road, and stop investing in polluting and high carbon projects. So lastly, will be investors and financial institutions should also be encouraged to support transitory activities through transition finance. So I probably will stop here, and I'll discuss later for the rest of my slides. Back to you, Chair.
Thanks a lot, and welcome again, Andy Kalitz, Secretary General-elect from the International Gas Union. Welcome again. And in Germany, we are currently very much discussing the importance of Nord Stream 2 and the provision of natural gas as a bridge, or as a means of bridging the energy transition that is, for obvious reasons, very important and crucial for decarbonization. So thanks again for joining, and please.
Thank you, Professor, and timely. I will make the opening remark that I differ from Jeffrey Sachs in 3 ways. Firstly, I don't blame all the problems of the world on politicians. Nations get the politicians they deserve. Secondly, I stand very clear that the incredible progress made during the 20th century in the world was on the back of first coal, then oil, then gas, in terms of not technology, but in terms of human development, in terms of human population, in terms of longevity, and in terms of the reduction of poverty, all of that done on the back. But yes, our planet faces a crisis right now, and we need to address it.
Andy, please turn on the mic. Don't hear you.
We couldn't hear you, Andy, please.
My apologies. I did not get that message. Thank you. I'll restart for 1 second. I differ from Jeffrey Sachs, Professor Henning, in 3 ways. Firstly, I don't blame the world's problems on politicians. Nations get the politicians they deserve, from Germany to Russia to South Africa to the United States. Secondly, I do not believe that pursuing a single objective is in fact the way to move forward. We need to at all times pursue multiple objectives. And the third one is that the 20th century was the golden era of human development in terms of life expectation, human population, human development, and the reduction of poverty. And that was done on the back of coal and oil and gas. But our planet now faces a crisis, and we need to address that. As we speak on this Wednesday, oil, coal, gas, hydro, nuclear, wind, and sun contribute to the world's energy as you see it on the left hand. And yes, the energy transition that we face is one of the most significant transitions in industrial sense the world has ever seen, in terms of impact on economies, geopolitical power balances, of taxes, on energy prices, on energy security, on energy reliability, and yes, importantly, on the environment. But in conversations, I find that the scale and scope of the global energy system is underestimated. And to give you an indication of the scale of global energy, the world's largest gas company, which I chose, is Russian, Gazprom. Gazprom supplies 12% of world gas, but today, on this Wednesday, 3% of world energy. All the installed solar capacity in all the wind farms in the world supply as much energy, less energy to the world than Gazprom does today. And in China, where 2 of our speakers come from, the Three Gorges hydroelectric plant, the largest single energy plant in the world, supplies only 1.5% of Chinese electricity, but 0% of world energy and 0% of world electricity, to give you a scale. The country of Qatar, which is the world's largest so-called liquefied natural gas exporter, supplies 4% of world gas, 1% of world energy today. And all the wind farms together installed in the world over the past 20 years supplied 3% of the world's energy today. And last but not least, importantly, in terms of the transition, all the installed battery capacity in the United States, in Europe, in Australia, and China, Japan together supply 0% of today's daily energy and 0% of today's just renewable power. Okay. That's the reality that we face. And I pay tribute to the important role that Russia, as one of our host countries of today, plays in global energy, because whilst it on the one hand keeps itself warm largely with gas, it is playing a very important role on its western side to keep Europe warm and energized and mobile, and to keep China energized and warm and mobile at the other end. Now, from my perspective, members of the panel, but also audience, the global COVID crisis and pandemic has demonstrated that cabinets of the world needed to do 4 things at the same time. The first one, they needed to save human lives now. They needed to keep the global economy going now. They needed to develop and roll out vaccine technology, and they needed to protect the debt load of future generations. That's why I say, and if any cabinet or any country said, I can do just one of those, it runs into a crisis in the other 3. And if we think that if they just said, we will save human lives now, irrespective of the debt load, irrespective of the impact on the economy, that's when it goes wrong. And that's where I differ from Jeffrey Sachs. In the energy transition, 5 things need to be done by cabinets and countries. First one, the most important one, is to supply countries with secure, available, reliable energy. The second one is to protect the environment, starting with climate, but also air and biodiversity. The third one is to develop all the new technologies of renewable storage, hydrogen, carbon capture that we spoke of, especially our Chinese friends contributed so clearly on. The fourth one is to protect the debt load of future generations. And the last one is the matter of price. Supply affordable, competitive energy. I put it last, but not to leave it out before we see public protest. So if you ask me, bring that together, what will the global future energy system look like? Firstly, it is clear to me that the single energy form, which for decades to come will still keep the energy system together because it helps renewables to grow, because it helps hydrogen to grow, is gas. The second one is going to be massively increased solar capacity. The third one is going to be massively increased wind electricity. But solar is available 1/5 of the day on average. 1/5. Wind is available 60 to 70% in places where it's strong. And then electricity storage to come. And the last new kid on the block, either produced from natural gas on the left or solar electricity and wind electricity in the middle, is going to be hydrogen. To also, as Professor Chung and others spoke about POSCO and the hard to abate energy sectors, it's going to be hydrogen. That's the energy picture for the next 3 decades as to what will dominate. I do not see nuclear doing it. I do not see coal doing it. I do not see oil doing it. My composite picture, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michaelis, for this impressive insights. I think these are very important to get an idea how we can develop the energy transition. That in turn is very important and crucial for decarbonization. Next, but certainly not least, is Boris Porfiriev, Scientific Director of the Institute of Economic Forecasting. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Henning. Do you hear me? It's okay?
Yeah,
okay.
We can hear you perfectly.
Okay, appreciate it. First of all, an honor to participate in the session, of course. And just want to raise 3 issues given the time constraint. I believe 2 points, or could be even 3, were tackled already by Jeffrey and right now by Annie. So number one, first, I want to emphasize the integrity of all sustainable development goals. I share the view that we have to address all the basket of these sustainable development goals, not one, not two. And this problem of intertwistedness between all this is a big problem. It's a problem of complexity, and we should address them simultaneously. And given this, we should bear in mind the priorities which are here with us, not only in the decades ahead, but also which are with now and existed before that. And with this, I would emphasize the World Economic Forum forecast given in 2020, this group on this global risk, as well as this year, which emphasized the climate problem, the climate action failure as risk number one, both in terms of likelihood and impact. And we see this black swan effect this year when the COVID-19 popped off. And I'm not sure that we don't have black swans ahead. So it's number one, and number two, one, I believe, couldn't imagine how you could resolve this problem of climate, of this GIG reduction or others without the finance, without funding, without poverty addressing. So all in all should be bear in mind. Of course, this in no way devaluates the problem of climate and the problem of reduction of emissions. But we should remember that if you use this word as a low carbon policy or low carbon development, it actually means that it targets only the problem of emissions. And even more, it targets the problem of emissions of carbon. For instance, it misses the problem of nitrogen oxide, which is important if the transportation is involved. Number two, again, it's addressed only the problem of emissions of greenhouse gases. It's actually, it leaves behind the problem of suspended matter, which Professor Sachs already mentioned, which is the key culprit of the increased death toll in the countries. And the third, it also devaluates the problem of adaptation. As we know, Paris Agreement emphasized the equal importance of both tracks of addressing climate problems. Number one is reduction of greenhouse gases reduction, and also or mitigation, and adaptation, which is no less important. And in this sense, I would emphasize the recent publication of DISA from United Nations, I mean this World Economic and Social Prospects, which stresses the importance of resilience, both economic resilience and climate resilience. It's not only the reduction of greenhouse gases. Number 2 point is the problem of specificity of the strategy. Each country, each nation, develops and implements while taking the climate and all other issues. As we know, Paris Agreement, as well as the framework, also address the importance of the specific approach, given the differentiation but generic responsibility of the countries to reduce the risk of climate impact. And if, for instance, Russia is, as far as it is concerned, we should bear in mind that the Russian is number one leading reduction of greenhouse gases emissions, up to almost 50% starting from 1990. It produces some 37 to up to 38% of its energy on the low carbon sources. And if gas is involved, as Andy correctly puts it, it's up to 85%. But on the other hand, we have a big problem. We have a very low energy efficiency economy, and it is responsible for the very high load of these emissions per head. So, and this assumes, please switch to the other side, another slide, please. Would you please? Okay. And skip number 8, please. Number 8. Number 8. Okay. Okay. Thank you. And this implies the specificity of the Russian strategy for addressing the climate risk problem, and in particular the problem of low emission, not low carbon, but low emission problem, as it correctly put in the Paris Agreement. So in our institute, we modeled these strategies. We came out with these 3 models. One is inertial scenario, which assumes that it's business as usual, which is completely fiasco in terms of complying with the Paris Agreement threshold of 1.5 up to 2 centigrade compared with the pre-industrial era. The second scenario is, as we call it, aggressive or radical scenarios. We practically, what we did, we just used the data from this Green Deal in the EU and to try to fill it in our model. So we came up with it, okay, we will meet the threshold of Paris Agreement, but on the other hand, we will completely fail with the rate of growth of our economy. It will be some 1.3% within the time frame of 2021 up to 2050, which is some 25 times less than the world GDP dynamics, which is completely unthinkable. And of course, it will be again an economic fiasco if we consider all 3 axes of sustainable development. So the economic axis will be a fiasco. And so we have this last one, this MET scenario. I'm not going into details, but the core is that it involves structural and technological transformation with a focus on energy efficiency. And of course, we also stress the natural climate solutions. As we know, natural climate solutions could provide as much as 30% of the whole contribution to reduce the greenhouse gases reduction. So in Russia, it's almost the same figures. We recalculated it for Russia. So we came with this, we find the same result. And finally, the third point, and with this I will strongly agree with what Professor Sachs mentioned in his keynote. This is the problem of cooperation between all the countries in solution both sustainable development issues and, as a part of it, a climate issue as well. And it involves also funding. It also involves a technology transfer. Otherwise, we will come to the gridlock. But what does it mean? It means that we have to get rid of all this kind of financial and technological sanctions which preclude this. We should also stop these trade wars, and we of course should think over at least twice, and better thrice, about using these transborder taxes and other regulations, given that it's very selective. Actually, it provides gains for one side, but other sides, well, are and I don't mean Russia, by the way, or China or US, which are strongly involved in such kind, or will be strongly involved in such kind of restrictions. I mean, developing countries. I don't have time to go into detail, but if there will be questions of all, I try to respond. So my point is here that we should go from the Green Deals, which is actually deals with national and regional stakeholders, that should be replaced by a global true cooperation by all the countries to find effective solutions for the SDG development and, of course, climate problem. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your introductory comments and remarks. I think we have 10 more minutes for a second short round. And so far, we haven't talked so much about regulation and the governance and the role of institutions and regulation. So my first question to you is, do you think the regulatory framework has already become irreversible to credibly trigger investments, long-term investments, and to take the financial risks behind that? That's my first question. And the second question is, do you think it's possible to combine the recovery from the crisis with more long-term structural investments? Can we renew the economy in the aftermath of the crisis, of the pandemic, given that the fiscal space probably is not so big? So these are my two questions. Maybe you can shortly answer or give a comment on these two questions. Maybe we can take, or Egon Schong, please. Would like to start?
First, my answer to your first question. Are you really serious about our commitment? Like for Paris Climate Agreement, Jeffrey has mentioned about it. Yes, very important, but I'm not sure whether it is sufficient. It is necessary, but Paris Climate Agreement is just a voluntary pledge and review. And frankly speaking, I'm not sure whether the private sector and the investor, are they really seriously looking at it, whether it really means business. So they are still undecided about it. They're suspicious about it. They are watching. So it is very important to send out a signal that the political statement means real business or real commitment. And the second point, regarding the Green New Deal, the fact that government is emphasizing Green New Deal means that the commitment for carbon neutrality or net zero still not clear, which means that government is only focusing on public money to push the net zero, which means that they are not confident to mobilize a private investment, because as you say, we have a very limited public fiscal space, and I don't think it is enough to meet the net zero or the carbon neutrality at all. Then we have to have definitely we need investment from private sector, but since private sector investment is not happening, that's why it is showing that the Green New Deal, emphasis on Green New Deal means that private sector investment is not coming yet, which means that the private sector still doesn't believe it. So it is very important for the government to prove that they really mean business. Then the real investment can happen. Okay, thank you.
Can I make a contribution?
Someone who wants to add? Andy?
The energy transition, the subject of the either fiscal implications that Professor Chung raised, or the energy price implications of the transition is an under-discussed subject. We speak a lot about the technology, we speak a lot about the subsidies, but we do not discuss either the fiscal space, the fiscal implications. And there are only two payers. If there is an investment or a cost of the energy transition, it is either going to be paid by customers or it's going to be paid by taxpayers. Governments, even if they pretend that they pay for it, or even if they take on debt to pay for it, do not pay for it. And so until that discussion is clearer with the public, we will not make progress. Investors, we bemoan the fact that investors do not want to invest in industry right now, so they play in Wall Street rather than Main Street. It is because of the policy uncertainty in the investor framework in terms of returns and a certain stability in that. So investors do not owe to invest. They will invest when it makes money and when they don't shortly afterwards take a haircut after doing so because of policy instability. So I call seriously for every time that somebody puts a plan on the table saying, and yes, what are the price implications for customers who will pay it and perhaps should pay it, but let's face up to it, or taxpayers who pay the alternative.
I think that's important. My impression is that the new narrative of the society is way ahead of regulation. It's interesting. It's the other way around than normally it is, right? So the narrative is there first, and my impression is that firms want to follow, but regulation is not so clear. that they have reliable incentives to invest and to finance their investments. Anyone else who wants to?
Okay.
Boris, please.
Yes. Just a brief comment on two questions. Number one, about investments. I believe that we should, while we're talking about investment, we should consider the problem between between carbon taxes and carbon trading. From my perspective, carbon taxes, well, are a little bit overemphasized. I'm a strong favor for the market, and I believe, at least for Russia, it's much more efficient using this trading. And in the global perspective, for instance, I believe that currently carbon trading covers only some, believe 12 or 13% of total amount of emissions. But a global demand for voluntary carbon credit could increase by a factor of 15 by 2030 and by a factor of 100 by 2050 if I will cite, for instance, McKinsey latest reports. So as far as the second question is concerned about recovery, I believe also you mean recovery from the present Corona crisis. We have a big lesson, I believe, we should learn from the Corona crisis, and we are still learning from this crisis. It's learning for preventive and crisis adaptation. We see how we adapt to these new conditions. And it's a big lesson for instance, for climate adaptation. I believe we should learn from this. And it's a big lesson both for adaptation of the whole economy, for a resilient economy as such. And of course, it's a strong impetus for taking this moment of recovery to start implementing this long-term sustainable development strategy, of course, with this national specificity considered.
Thanks.
Chengling?
Yeah, please.
Yes. Thank you very much. So I would like to respond to both of your questions. The first one is about investment regulation. Actually, I mentioned about risk weights for green assets and also non-green assets, which is already proved in China, at least for green loans. For example, the green loans non-performing rate was only close to 0.3%, while the aggregate NPL ratio for all loans was close to 3%, and for some banks it will be even lower. So the difference for aggregate NPL ratio and also green loans will be 10 times difference, and let alone the difference between green and non-green, especially for high carbon and polluting assets. So it is at least fact-based in China, and I believe this is also the case for many other countries and economies. They do not have the data yet because they do not have the classification system or taxonomy. So we are thinking that maybe this could be possible for many countries, including China, and some of them are already doing exploration without even changing the overall risk weights for different assets. But they are trying to figure out how to mobilize the resources within the bank to it's kind of more like penalize the lending to the high carbon assets and polluting ones, but actually incentivizing the green ones. So this is also something at a later stage, the regulatory strengths can come in. Regulators and central banks, maybe some instances, the international organizations like FSB can step in to organize an international, like say, alignment. The second response to the recovery from crisis, I think you're mentioning the COVID crisis, but actually we're already in two crises. One crisis is on COVID, the second crisis is climate. So if we are only getting out of the COVID crisis and while stepping into the second crisis very immediately, this is not a very good recovery. So I think this recovery has to be green, and we have to address the two crises in the same time. So green recovery will have to be in place, and I'm not quite sure if this is not a plan, but I think the plan has to be addressing the two crises in the same time. Back to you.
Thank you. Sure. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to point out another point of these regulations in China, because China has a huge economy. So sometimes we can make a lot of regulation, but those regulations cannot properly implement it across China. So, but recently in terms of green economy development, so low carbon, sustainable development, we have witnessed the emergence of a lot of NGOs, especially local NGOs. Those local NGOs played a very important role in supervising local governments' exercise over these low carbon economy development criteria, over these things. And then they played very positive role. They are not only protest against the result that the local government cannot achieve those low carbon economy development, but they behave very positively to provide some advices to local government, provide some solutions to local government, and also because those NGOs could exert some objective measurement of these targets. So every year, those NGOs will publish a list of low carbon economy development for 50 cities in China. So those mayors have to look at these performance numbers. So if their cities are not listed as a good performing cities, so they will lose face or they will less competitive in the hierarchy of Chinese bureaucracy. So that's something very interesting, because in China, we have witnessed the emergence of these NGOs, and these NGOs do play a very, very important and positive role in promoting sustainable and green development in China.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I think time is almost up. So I would like to thank you again for joining us today. And it was a pleasure. It was very inspiring. And I think we have seen that we are all aware of this objective of decarbonization, and we are all focused on achieving that goal. But on the other hand, we have seen that we need to accelerate that transition. So that was very interesting. And I think, Mark, back to you. We have no other choice than to continue our conferences and our platform to discuss all these important topics of our future and to turn all our hopes into a new economic reality. So back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Henning, and thank you all of the panelists for joining us this afternoon. I think this is conclude, the today's symposium that was supposed to be held face-to-face in St. Petersburg, but the reality of the pandemic made this impossible. But I think over the last 2 days, we were able really, I think, to redefine and to redesign the global economy. This is a forward-looking agenda. It's not going to be ending today. And I hope that you will be able to join us for other seminars and conferences that we are planning over the next few months, particularly with the G20 presidency of Italy and during the IMF and World Bank meeting during the spring and the October meeting. Before we conclude, I wanted to give the floor to our host, Rector Igor Makhmislev, the rector of the St. Petersburg State University of Economics, to thank you warmly on behalf of all of you and all of the participants, speakers who have been joining us for the last 2 days. First, for his the work of his team, because even if we do Zoom, there is a lot of work behind the scene in terms of logistics. And Mr. Rector, if you are still there, I would be pleased to give you the floor and to thank you warmly for your support for this initiative. I hope that we will be able to come to St. Petersburg again. I used to come in your city every year. And I hope that post-pandemic, we will be able to continue these traditions and to invite some of our guests here, and most of them to join us again for face-to-face to meet. Rector, thank you so much. I give you the floor.
Mark, спасибо огромное.
Mark, thank you very much for your kind words. We did a lot of work when organizing this event. I'd like to thank our big international team that participated in preparation and conducting of this symposium. A lot of work. Thanks a lot to all the technical personnel. Many thanks to the interpreters that enabled us to understand each other in these 2 days. Many thanks to all the panelists, all the speakers for their very informative presentations and very valuable conclusions. We now see the world with different eyes. We realize the world is changing and we should keep pace. I really want that our next year meeting is not virtual, but shall be real in St. Petersburg. I'll be happy to shake hands with you here in St. Petersburg. It's a beautiful city, and nothing is as precious as real meetings. Nowadays, time is still difficult. The pandemic is still present on the planet, but however, we've retained our connections, and it's really great to socialize. Our Earth is very fragile. Economy depends on many factors, not only on internal country economies, but on many other factors as well that we've mentioned throughout these 2 days. Thanks again. See you again. And let's continue working according to our agreements. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Ciao.
Всего хорошего. До свидания. Спасибо.
Спасибо.
До свидания. Спасибо.
До встречи. До встречи.
Great pleasure. Thanks. Take
Всем
care.
огромное спасибо. Получила огромное удовольствие. Оставайтесь здоровыми. Берегите себя.